Okay, so today we're going to talk about the reading and writing process, and specifically about revising. So what is revising? What's the difference between editing and revising? So editing is the process of looking for and correcting. It's the process of looking for and correcting surface mistakes like spelling, grammar and usage, formatting, capitalization, punctuation, all of those things. Revising is the process of evaluating your writing and correcting deeper issues. So you would look for mistakes such as poor thesis logic, lack of coherence and unity, inappropriate language, wordiness, unclear abstract subjects, passive voice, stretcher phrases, colloquialisms. That's a very long word and hard to say. Okay, so what is poor thesis logic? What does that mean? What's a thesis statement? It occurs when the paper does not persuade readers that your thesis is correct. So what's a thesis statement? It is a statement in an essay that is one sentence, and it explicitly identifies the purpose of the paper, or it previews its main ideas. It is an assertion, not a statement or a fact, okay, or an observation. So an example would be people use many lawn chemicals. That would be a factor in observation. A thesis would read something like people are poisoning the environment with chemicals merely to keep their lawns clean. That is how you would write a thesis. It takes a stand rather than announcing a subject. The thesis of this paper is the difficulty of solving our environmental problems. That would be an announcement. A thesis would say solving our environmental problems is more difficult than many environmentalists believe. So it's giving that main idea of the whole thing. It is the main idea. It is not the title. So if the title just says Social Security and Old Age, the thesis would say continuing changes in the Social Security system makes it almost impossible to plan intelligently for one's retirement. So that is the difference between a title, an announcement, a fact or observation. You want it to have a sentence and it have some meaning behind it. It's very narrow. It's not very broad. So it's very specific. So a broad subject would say, the American steel industry has many problems. Well, yeah, we know that. A thesis is going to narrow it down. The primary problem in the American steel industry is the lack of funds to renovate outdated plants and equipment. That is how you would go with a thesis. It is specific rather than vague or general. So vague would mean Hemingway's war stories are very good. Specific would say Hemingway's stories helped create a new prose style by employing extensive dialogue, shorter sentences, and strong words. A thesis statement has one main point rather than several main points. So just one main point. If you have too many main points, it's going to be really difficult for that reader to really understand what you're trying to say. So here's your example. Stephen Hawking's physical disability has not prevented him from becoming a world-renowned physicist, and his book is the subject of a movie. Well, you got 2 points there. You're talking about Stephen Hawking as a physicist, but you're also talking about his book is the subject of a movie. So you need to pick one or the other. So the main point would say Stephen Hawking's physical disability has not prevented him from becoming a world-renowned physicist. So how do you revise? You want to review your organization. So a good example would be to read your paper out loud. If you read the paper out loud slowly, you have 2 senses. You're seeing it and you're hearing it. So you could also record yourself reading it. Thus, what sense misses the other one may pick up. Then you want to check your thesis statement. Write down your thesis on a piece of paper. If it is not directly stated in your essay, does it actually show and state your main idea? Is it supported by the paper? Does it need to be changed in any way? On that piece of paper, list the main idea of each paragraph under the thesis statement. So is each paragraph relevant to the thesis? Are they in a logical sequence or order? And then you also want to check what's called the paper's development. So reading the paper aloud is going to be a big thing to help you. Again, check your thesis statement, and then check your development. So are there sufficient details? Is the logic valid? Define development, like provides support for each point. So each point that you make, does it use personal experiences or facts? Does it use examples and definitions? Does it examine causes and effects? And is it descriptive? And then you want to check the paper's coherence and unity. So how do you do that? Are those major points connected? Are the relationships between them expressed clearly? Do they all relate to the thesis? Define unity as each paragraph should focus on a single subject or idea. So you should have your beginning paragraph with your main idea and then your 3 points under that. And then through each paragraph, you should have 3 paragraphs after that, and each paragraph should have something describing the main point or describing one of your points and then details to help back up that point. And so that's something you want to keep in mind whenever you're doing a paper. So coherence, here's some coherence. All parts should be related to each other and remain focused on the subject. You have logical bridges, so that carries ideas from sentence to sentence and it uses a parallel form. Verbal bridges repeat keywords and synonyms, replace nouns with pronouns, use transition words. So if you look right here, you have, common transition words and phrases. So you want to make sure you use good common transition words and phrases. Things like finally, therefore. So if you were concluding, if you're adding information, you could say in addition to, next, most importantly, blah, 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 blah. So make sure you use things like that. So what do we do for step 2 to revise? Well, remember you're writing for others, so no matter how familiar others may be with your material, they cannot get inside your head and understand your approach to it unless if you express yourself clearly. So it is useful to read the paper through once as you keep in mind whether or not the student or teacher or friend who will be reading it will understand what you're saying. Have you said exactly what you wanted to say? So always consider your audience and who you're writing to. So an example would be, you have an original. So the media's exploitation of the Watergate scandal showed how biased it was already. A revision, the media's coverage of the Watergate scandal suggests that perhaps those in the media had already determined Nixon's guilt. So this would be your original choice of words. And if you want to revise it to make it sound a little clearer, that's how you could revise that. So in addition to being more specific, the revision does not force the reader to defend the media. In the first example, though, let me back up here. So in that first example, the statement is so exaggerated that even the reader who is neutral on that issue may feel that it's necessary to defend the media. So the writer of the original has made his job of persuading the reader that much harder. So then you have step 3. Step 3 is to review your writing. Check for abstract subjects. What does that mean? What does that mean? So what you want to do is pay close attention to the abstract subjects that are combined with passive verbs. So try substituting concrete or personal subjects with active verbs. So an example would be more attractiveness is sometimes given an act when it is made illegal. You would go, when an act becomes illegal, some people find it more attractive. So if you look at that, you see how when it was revised, it kind of changes that perspective a little bit. All right, so then you want to review your writing, okay? Cut out any wordiness wherever possible. So what do I mean by wordiness? They are desirous of, instead you would revise it and say they want, okay? Don't make it super wordy, don't overdo it. Use active verbs. Since verbs tend to carry the meaning of your sentences, use the most precise and active ones possible. So avoid constructions using the various forms of the verb to be. So something would be an original would be inflation is a threat to our economy. You could revise it and say inflation threatens our economy. You see where that helps a little bit? Okay, so then you want to review your writing. Avoid using stretcher phrases. Don't use phrases like it is and there are unless they're needed for emphasis. So remember the need for strong verbs. So an example would be there were several reasons for the United States entrance into the war. The United States entered the war for several reasons. Would be a good revision. Replace colloquialisms with fresh and more precise statements because colloquialisms tend to be used so often they are not very precise in meaning. A hassle, for example, can be an annoyance, an argument, or a physical fight. So always make sure you use proper vocabulary. So an original would be her behavior flipped me out. Instead of saying that, you can say her behavior stunned me at first. We don't want to use common language like in a conversation. We want to try to make it as proper as we can. All right, so then review your rhythm. One of the last steps, be sure that no parts of the paper are short and choppy. So be sure that the rhythm of your paper is not interrupted, except for a good reason like emphasis. A good way to go about smoothing out such a problem is to try combining sentences, and in so you're showing the relationship between them. So the best show in terms of creating a tense atmosphere is Jeopardy. This is probably the most famous of all game shows. It is my favorite show. So like it feels, if you read that, that's not a very good rhythm. So you could revise it like the best show in terms of creating a tense atmosphere is Jeopardy, which is also probably the most famous of all game shows and happens to be my favorite. You see how that they combined that whole sentence there instead of having three choppy little sentences, it's one big sentence. And sometimes that looks better in a rhythm than a bunch of short, choppy sentences. So here's some practice. If you read this passage, you're going to say which sentence should be removed from the passage. So read through the passage, pause this, read through it, choose your answer. So which one should be removed from that? D. He also hosted a New Year's Eve special for many years in New York City. Okay, we're already talking about the New Year's Eve special. So we would remove that one because it's really not even talking about the New Year's Eve special. It's talking about other things. So here's a few more examples. Pause them and go through, find the correct answers. And then I'm going to send you some IXL practices for you to help practice.